This is Cars and Bids, and today we're going to talk about setting a reserve price for your auction. The reserve price is one of the most important parts of an auction and one of the most controversial and one of the most discussed and one of the most argued about, frankly. And today I'm going to talk reserves. What should your reserve price be? How do you set it? Should you do no reserve? Everything about reserve. So let's get started. Now, before I get started, I do want to highlight 4 cars that will be selling this upcoming week that you should especially watch out for, 4 especially exciting auctions. One is this 2019 Ferrari GTC4 Lusso. This is a very special car, one of my favorite modern Ferraris, the Ferrari for families, if you will. This is a one-owner car with about 1,500 miles, has a very reasonable reserve. This is an exciting auction, and I'm excited to see the bids come in. It's a very special car with good options. Next up, another car I'm excited for this week is this 1999 Hummer H1. Now, I owned an H1. It was a rather unfortunate vehicle, but this is the H1 you want because it has been Cummins diesel swapped. The Hummer never got the powertrain it actually needed from the factory until the very last model year, so a lot of people would swap in better engines. It's expensive, difficult to do. This one has had the swap done, which should make it very appealing for potential buyers. And next up, another car I'm very excited about this week is Hoovie's Garage BMW M Coupe. This car is offered with no reserve. It is a very special and exciting vehicle. I love these M Coupes, especially the Z3 M Coupe, which this is. Relatively low miles, cool color. Hoovie took amazing photos, of course, and it's no reserve. So this is your chance to get something really special, potentially with a bargain. This is a cool car. And finally, the last car I'm excited about this week, let me pull it up, is this Toyota Land Cruiser fire truck. This is one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen. Only 14,000 miles because it wasn't going very far to fight fires, and it has no doors, so it's not like you could really drive it very far. This is definitely more of a novelty, curiosity type car, but it is so crazy. It is an FJ60, and you can see that in the front, but in the back, it's a fire truck, and I absolutely love this. I love the photos, and there is a video of it actually shooting water. So this could be your own personal fire truck if you're worried that the fire department won't reach you in time. A very special and unusual vehicle, and I'm excited to see how all those go this week. Okay, so there's a lot to cover when it comes to setting reserve prices, a lot to discuss. I'm gonna start with an explanation of what a reserve price is. A reserve is a value that you can choose that if bidding doesn't get that high, your car doesn't sell. So, for example, if your reserve price is $40,000, but bidding only gets up to $35,000, then your car doesn't sell. You keep it didn't meet your reserve price. But if bidding reaches $40,000 or it gets to $42,000 or whatever, then that is what your car sells for. So there are 2 types of auctions we offer: auctions with a reserve and auctions that are no reserve. We charge $89 for a reserve auction, $49 for a no reserve auction. Your first question probably would be, why should I do no reserve? It seems risky. Why would anyone want to do that? It's a good question. So let's start by discussing no reserve auctions. Now, I personally think that more people should be doing no reserve auctions without a reserve price at all. In fact, when I started coming up with the idea for Cars and Bids, one of my thoughts was that all auctions would be no reserve. But my partner and I, we kind of decided maybe there wouldn't be enough cars if we did that. People would think it's too risky. They wouldn't want to do it. These days, something like 35 or 40% of our auctions are no reserve, but still, I think it should be higher. Now, the main reason why I say this is quite simply, you will get more money, more interest, more views, and more traffic if you go no reserve. People see no reserve and they just get excited. There's this like electric feeling about a no reserve auction. You know the car is selling. It just drives interest and eyes and clicks and bids and dollars, and it's just more. People think, man, I could win this car today. They know when they're bidding, that bid might be the amount that wins it. There's also this factor, people see no reserve and they think, wow, this seller just has so much confidence in this vehicle. He is certain it's going to bring its retail value or more. And I think that also really helps to drive the bids on no reserve auctions. This feeling that while the seller knows his car, he knows it's good, he's just confident it will get market price. And that also helps people bid and get excited about no reserve cars. Now, I know it's scary to do no reserve cars, to not have any safety net in place. So your car could sell for like $5, but the truth is that never really happens. We've had great traffic, great views, and especially if your car is something relatively desirable among enthusiasts, I mean, I still get people with E39 M5 saying, oh, I'm afraid to do no reserve because what if bidding only goes up to $1,000? And it's like, dude, if bidding goes to $1,000, I will buy your E39 M5, and many other people will too. That isn't going to happen. It hasn't happened yet in like 700 auctions. It's not going to happen. Nothing good ever gets bid up to $1,000 or $5,000 or whatever. It just doesn't happen. So what people do is then they say, well, okay, fine, I get it. Let's just put on a low reserve. So my $40,000 car, how about we do a $10,000 reserve? And it's like, no, that's the exact opposite, because then people will see that you have a reserve, and so that doesn't help create this excitement around your car, and your reserve is so low it's going to be met on the first day anyway, so it's pointless to even do it. But people just, they feel like they have to have a safety net in place. I tell them, I promise your car will not get 0 bids, but it's hard sometimes to believe that. And so no reserve cars, they just generally get more bids, more interest. It is a high risk situation, but it's also a high reward situation. You take a big risk in listing with no reserve, with no safety net at all, but the reward is also high. At the end, you get more money for the car. Those first few days where not too many bids are coming in, you're very anxious, but things work out in the end, usually. Now there's one big reason why I wouldn't list with no reserve, which is if you don't have a lot of confidence in your car. If your car is really weird and you're not sure people will like it, if you have some modifications, you're not sure how it'll be accepted, if you have accident history and you think that could drop the value more than you're hoping it will, if you have super high miles and there's no real comparable listings, maybe then I'd want to reserve just to be sure it's not going to sell for way under what it's worth, because this underlying issue, it's less well known, it has some defect that could really turn away buyers. But if you have a popular enthusiast car and it's in nice shape and you're confident in it, I mean, we've had 22 BMW M3s on Cars and Bids, 19 of them have sold. Yours will not be the one that somehow is just completely ignored and gets no bids at all. It's ridiculous. Now, a lot of people are going to be watching this and going to say, well, of course you, me, want no reserve because that's how you make money. And this is true. Cars and Bids model is the buyer pays a 4.5% fee to us after the sale. So we only generate revenue if a car sells. So yes, we need to sell cars to generate revenue, and so we want more cars to sell. In full transparency. But I truly, truly do believe that no reserve auctions bring more money and more interest and more bids. And if you've watched a no reserve auction at its conclusion on Cars and Bids, the bidding wars that happen, you know exactly what I mean. You know what I'm talking about. But if you remain skeptical of this, I understand. We do offer reserve pricing, and it's totally normal to want a reserve. Not everyone has a high tolerance for risk, and I totally understand why you wouldn't want to do that. So let's talk about how to set your reserve price. Okay, number one, first thing to note, the reserve price should be the bare minimum that you are willing to accept in order to sell the car. It is not the high retail value of the car. I love when we sell certain cars for big money. We've had a few record-setting sales on the site. They get more money than any other public sale for that particular model has ever had. But I also cringe a little bit because I know the very next day we're going to get flooded with people who have lesser examples of that car wanting that same number as their reserve price. And it's crazy. People are going to see that one owner E92 M3 competition with low miles, never modified, manual transmission. They're going to ask for that reserve price in that same range for their 4-owner automatic convertible car with 4 times the miles in an accident in the history report. It happens without fail. People see a big sale of their car and suddenly they think that their average example is worth the very best number for the very best example. And that's not true. That sale you saw didn't establish a new market baseline, it established a new market peak. And that doesn't mean your car is worth that, or even that it's worth any more. So the first step in setting your reserve is be realistic. The top sale price is probably not what your car is worth unless your car is that nice or even nicer. Also, another thing to keep in mind in this same vein, retail asking prices on AutoTrader, Cars.com, CarGurus, whatever, these are not selling prices. We get people all the time saying, hey, my Focus RS is worth 35 because I see these people on AutoTrader, they're asking 34 and mine is a little bit nicer. Well, yeah, but those have been sitting on AutoTrader for 5.5 months at 34 and they're ultimately going to sell for 30. So an asking price isn't a great comparison comparison for a reserve price. And that's a mantra I'm going to repeat. Be realistic with your reserve price. The reserve is not the high retail value for the car. The reserve price isn't what you saw a perfect one sell for. It's the lowest you're willing to accept. And that brings me to the next item in reserve pricing, which is bids can bring the reserve price higher. And in fact, they almost always do. It's very rare we have cars sell for exactly the reserve. That happens maybe a couple times a week. But people don't think that way. So we'll get someone who sends in a car and they ask for a $30,000 reserve. And I'll do some research and I'll come back with a $27,000 reserve. And they'll reject it because they tell me they could never sell the car for such a low price and how dare I insult them. And I think because we're talking numbers and dollars, sellers get ultra focused and transfixed on that figure and they think, well, that will be the selling price. But the way the site works is bidding happens. Cars sell for way over reserve prices routinely, and some sellers just get razor focused on the reserve and they're totally blinded to the fact that it could bring a lot more than the reserve. And sellers who are willing to roll the dice and say, hey, yeah, I do want a little more, but let's see what happens. The car goes up for auction, they're almost always satisfied with the outcome. But sellers who don't get that the reserve price isn't necessarily the selling price, they just get so caught up in that reserve price number, they sort of lose track of the fact that it's an auction and bids could bring it much higher. We've had cars sell for double their reserve price. Recently, I negotiated like crazy with a guy for something like a 16 or 17 reserve. He wanted 19, the car sold for 27. That happens. It's not common that it's that high above, but again, it's very rare that a car actually sells for its exact reserve price. Okay, a few other big things to consider when setting a reserve. Number one, your modifications do not add the value to your car that you believe they do. I cannot tell you how many times people come to us with a car and they're realistic about the value of the car. And then they say, okay, my car's worth 25, I agree, but I've got $5,000 in mods, so now it's worth 30. And then some people actually say, plus I took the time to install the mods. And so that's worth 2. And so really now the car is worth 32. That happens every day. People truly believe that their mods are worth more than the retail cost of their mods because they're installed. This isn't the case. In fact, it's quite the opposite. A lot of used car buyers are very wary of buying a used car with modifications because they think the car, oh, it's been modified for performance, it's probably been driven hard, and who knows if the mods have even been installed correctly by someone who knows what they're doing and used correctly, or were they done with duct tape and twine? Nobody knows. And a lot of modifications are to your personal taste. So unless you can find someone who wants your exact car exactly how you set it up, they'll probably have to uninstall some stuff or change some stuff in order to get the car how they want it to be, and they're not willing to pay for all sorts of mods that they wouldn't have installed in the first place. To me, the general rule with mods is you are lucky to get back maybe 20 cents on the dollar of any mods that you put on the car, and truthfully, you're lucky to get back just about anything at all. All the smart guys I know, when they want to sell their modified cars, they take off the valuable modifications and sell them separately. Now, I know this is challenging, but if you're looking to maximize the money that you're getting for your car, don't be lazy. Take off your good mods, sell them separately, keep on the little stuff, and then sell the car. And by the way, take good pictures. Now, 2 quick exceptions to the mod thing I do want to point out. One, we found that modded off-roaders do tend to do pretty well. Performance mods people are a bit nervous of, but off-road mods, at least right now in today's world of SUV desirability, they're doing great. You still won't get back dollar for dollar what you spent on your mods, but you'll definitely get more than a non-modded vehicle if you've done good mods correctly that people want, or if you've modded, well, your BMW X5 with a lift kit or whatever. And the other exception, some well-done modifications undoubtedly do enhance the value of a car. You do a ton of stuff, you're going to be met with some skepticism from buyers, but if you keep a clean look and either do a few small modifications that make sense to enhance performance, or big mods that have real value, like an aftermarket supercharger on an M3 or a Ford Raptor, that kind of stuff will get you more money. But don't be surprised if you submit your car to us that's been lowered and you painted the wheels black and you did a body kit and you put in race seats and a race steering wheel and a boost gauge, and we're going to offer you about what you'd get if those mods weren't there. Another important thing in reserve setting, your special edition, your paint color, rarely that helps with your resale value. We recently got a Corvette submitted to us. The person wanted like a $60,000 reserve. And I did the research and I came to find out, the value of this Corvette was like $38,000. So I offered him like $37,000, $38,000 for the reserve. And the person who submitted the car comes back and says, you don't understand. This color is one of 212. And I'm like, look, that's cool. And it may have some value. but unless that car's color is literally gold, you're not getting $22,000 over the value of the car for your color. Same is true with special editions. A lot of automaker special editions, especially in the States, US models, they were just paint color, interior color, maybe some wheels, then they call it a special edition, usually to try to drive up sales at the end of a car's model run when they were kind of tailing off before a redesign. Usually these aren't more special than a normal one, and they don't command really that much more value. They're only special because the automaker needed something to try to bring in more sales. They're not really worth all that much more. Now, again, there are some exceptions here. Some colors obviously do bring more money. Nogaro blue on an S4. This car is a good example. Silver and red ones sell for a lot less. The heritage ones sell for a lot more. There are some exceptions, and there are also some exceptions to the special editions thing, but there are more special editions that don't raise value and paint colors that don't raise value than ones that do. And one final note on reserve setting. This one's important. Your payoff on your loan is not your reserve price necessarily. We've had some crazy cases where people come in, they submit a car that's worth 12 grand and they want like a $30,000 reserve. And I say to them, I don't get it. I mean, here are comps, comparable cars, like your car isn't worth. I send them links to cars on Car Gurus or Auto Tempest and I say, this is what your car is worth. What are you talking about? And they come back and say, oh no, you don't understand. That has to be my reserve because that's my payoff. And I'm like, okay, you're way underwater on your car. You owe more than it's worth, basically, probably because you rolled debt from several prior cars into this current one. That doesn't mean we make your reserve price your payoff amount. Like, it won't magically sell for your payoff just because you're in that financial situation. You can either keep the car and pay on it until you're in a more reasonable financial position with the car, or you sell the car and you make a cash contribution to your payoff in addition to the sale price of the car. But it isn't just magically worth more because that's what your payoff is. I can't give you a reserve price of your payoff if that isn't what the car is actually worth. So, those are my overall tips on reserve setting. No reserve, I truly believe it's the best for most cars. You will generally get more bids and more attention. Your car will not end up with 0 bids. It will not sell for $1. But if you're nervous, I get it. So if you want a reserve price, just keep in mind, be reasonable, high retail. The record-setting price for some similar car is not what your car is worth. Your payoff isn't your reserve. Your color may not really add anything. Your modifications probably don't add as much as you think. Those are some tips. But now that you have a better understanding of how to choose a reserve, submit your car to Cars and Bids. If you have a cool, modern enthusiast car, we'd love to have it with no reserve or with a reasonable reserve.